low-income families or residents of color. That is unfair. And having a car can be very important for residents who need to travel for work, especially if they live in a neighborhood with a lack of public transportation options, which are often in areas with a concentration of low-income families and communities of color as well. So I'm glad we're having this hearing today to discuss this issue. I want to say thank you to Glenn and to Paul and to Attorney General Maura Healey. This hearing and this issue impacts so many residents across our city. And with the pandemic still raging on, it's impacting so many lives. So it's important to have this conversation. And I just wanted to highlight one issue. I'll just be very brief. I always wondered, maybe the Attorney General, if he has an opportunity to weigh in, with car insurance. If you look at a location like the South Bay Mall, which is literally in the middle of South Boston, Dorchester, and Roxbury, and if there is a car break in there, why would the rates be higher for Roxbury or South Boston or Dorchester just because the location is there? But also the other issue I always wondered about is if you're on the highway system, say you're on 93 and you're passing through Dorchester and you get into an automobile accident or fender bender or right near Chinatown off the Mass Pike, would the rates for the residents of Chinatown or Dorchester go up just because you had an accident driving through that community? You might live somewhere else, but I often wondered if it would be impacted, if the rates would be impacted and absorbed by the neighborhood where the crash happened. Just some general comments. Anyway, I just want to say thank you to you, Councilor Mejia and Councilor Campbell, for having this very important discussion. Thank you for allowing me to speak.
Always. So I'm going to now ask my colleague, Councilor Arroyo from District 5, to share some opening remarks. You now have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So I want to thank the maker, Andrea Campbell, for this hearing. This is something when I was in high school, I'd noticed for the first time because I had a vehicle shortly after high school. And I remember just how different my auto insurance was to similarly situated friends in different neighborhoods and how much more I was paying than those individuals for, in some cases, less insurance. As we talk about right now, the reality is that communities of color and low-income communities are paying more for their insurance than others. Usually they have less to dedicate to these kinds of issues. And when I was a public defender, one of the major issues that we had for folks was driving uninsured because they could not afford insurance, but they still had to get to work. They still had to get their kids to daycare. They still had to get their kids to school. They still had to live a life. And then the effect of that was because we made insurance so unaffordable for them in their communities, we were now creating new pathways to criminalization, new pathways to criminalizing poverty. And so this issue has far-reaching consequences beyond just saving a couple dollars. It does have the reality of causing folks to put themselves in positions that otherwise they would not have had to put themselves in had the cost not been excessive. And so I look forward to hearing what solutions we might get to this, as well as some of the causes, the root causes we might be able to attack in changing this reality for so many. So thank you to those who are here today to discuss that. And thank you to the maker for bringing this important issue to the forefront.
Thank you, Councilor Arroyo. I really do echo your comments in regards to the financial hardship that continues to impact families, particularly those who are already struggling to get out of poverty. I can speak from my own lived experience, having my license at the age of, I think, was 16, zooming around the city of Boston and trying to juggle having 2 jobs just so that I can maintain this car was kind of crazy, but I needed to do that because I had to work. And I think that if we're really serious about removing barriers for families and for people to get out of poverty, I think that every little bit that we can do as a city, and as fiscal being more mindful. Insurance companies who are doing business in Boston need to be a little bit more, I wouldn't say micromanaged, but I think that Councillor Campbell's idea of really examining how we're being targeted in many ways is a great pathway to trying to figure out how we can undo the harm. And I know that a lot of folks out here would really appreciate your due diligence in making sure that we do everything possible. And I just want to thank Councillor Campbell for always uplifting the issues that are impacting our most vulnerable communities. And this is what it looks like when we step into our power and lead in ways that are going to move our people forward. So thank you, Councillor Campbell, for doing this. I would like to just switch things up a little bit. I know that we have our panelists, and I know you're eager to speak, and you've been invited to do so. But if anyone knows me, knows that I'm all about the people first. So I'm going to, if you don't mind, I'm going to lead with public testimony, because I think that it would be really important for all of us to hear how this is impacting those who are living the realities. And I also would like to give our panelists an opportunity to ask questions, those who are here for public testimony. This is a conversation. And I think that if we're really serious about creating space for people to be heard, then we need to change the way we do business. And so I'm going to ask those two folks that have signed up for public testimony to not only share their stories, but to really seize this moment to ask their own questions to our panelists and to the council. So get ready. I don't know what they're going to say, but I'm inviting you all to speak your truth, y'all. So I'm going to go first to, I believe we have Leon Rivera. If you are here and if you are camera ready, I would love to give you the opportunity to have the floor. Or I see that Andrew. Okay, so you're ready to go. So
Yes.
Leon Rivera, you now have the floor.
Thank you, Counselor. My name is Leon Rivera. I am a resident of District 7 in Roxbury, so I'm definitely being impacted by this myself. I remember being young, about, I want to say 16. I think I got my license at 18, I believe. And I remember having to have my mom help me with insurance because it was just so high. And I remember speaking to the agent, and the agent reminding me that the rates were higher because of the zip code that I was using, the zip code that I was living in. So I'm wondering what it will take for the council to work with, state officials. I'm seeing other states that are, working together with their local officials. Like in California, they're doing things together to ease the burden. So I'm wondering what, I'll join the conversation just to hear and see what you guys can come up with and work together as a council, and also bringing in state reps, I'm hoping, state senators as well, just to be able to come up with solutions, looking at other states and seeing what they're working with. But I would like to know what it will take for that to happen, because it doesn't only impact me, but I know plenty of friends, like Ricardo has said, they live in different areas of the city and their rates are much lower. And it's unfair, I believe, for families, especially when we're struggling now, even more with the whole pandemic. But even before, folks, I believe, shouldn't have to try to figure out if they're paying for insurance, or if they're paying, their phone bill late, or if they're paying their electricity. It's a real struggle. So I'm hoping to hear that some solutions come up from this conversation.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Rivera. I'm gonna then next go to Andrew Fisher, and then after Andrew Fisher, I'm going to ask our panelists, and then we're going to have a dialogue. Is that okay, Councilor Campbell? Okay, great.
Absolutely. Thank you, Councilor Mejia.
Andrew, you now have the floor.
Oh my goodness. My name is Andrew Fisher. I actually live in Arlington, but I've studied the way insurance works and come up with what I kind of think no one thinks about. And I know I have 2 minutes, so the quickest way to say this is I would urge everybody to go on the website of the Insurance Corporation of British Columbia. It has about 3.6 million automobiles. is the only provider of auto insurance for basic auto insurance liability in British Columbia, single payer. Now, they're allowed, other companies are allowed to buy collision, but it appears from my research that everybody buys it from the ICBC, Insurance Corporation of British Columbia. And it was so profitable that around 2010, the Liberals came into power and made it for profit. And they used their profits to pay $1.6 billion to the province over 6 years. The last 3 years, they've been losing money. But the key is it's so transparent and so inclusive, and the spirit in which it's run is amazing. So, okay, that said, if you look at the way insurance has evolved, it's not a planned affair. It has the tendency to just fragment the community, and it removes the experience of mutual aid from the text of the community conversation. Mutual aid can be the glue that binds a community together. It informs people of loss experience, and it motivates people to do better. Texting would stop if people were aware of how badly it was hurting their community. Just two other unrelated comments, well, disparate comments to wrap up. I love talking about this. I've given a talk at a UU church about similarities between church groups and insurance groups. They both gather as many people together as they can and get people to contribute a small amount of money to pay for losses. Insurance calls high-risk behavior a high-risk behavior. Religious group calls it a sin, whatever. The disadvantage for religious groups is their reason to be, their function as providers of mutual aid has been removed by the process of insurance, only where insurance is easy to do. So the last comment is one way to look at insurance is, and this has just evolved, it hasn't been done on purpose. Insurance only insures those parts of the social contract that are easy and profitable and subject to actuarial predictability. So a lot of money and information is taken out of the community and gone to 30 or 40 different companies. We've lost even the ability to discuss it intelligently. What I've tried to start here in Arlington is, part of my argument is this way of doing insurance that we do is old-fashioned, because people can find out for themselves. They can survey their own community and put on a spreadsheet what's going on. We have 32,000 cars in Arlington. The treasurer's office puts a excise tax on each one of them. About 600 cars in each precinct. And according to averages, all the reports I can find, Insurance Information Institute, they cost over $1,000 to insure. That means $30 million. So I'm trying to start this conversation, and I don't want to prattle on. I'd love it if people contact me, and I think I have something to contribute and get a conversation started.
Thank you, Andrew. Appreciate you being here, and don't go anywhere because we'll plug you right back in, and we're going to move on to our two panelists.
Can I say one last thing? My electrician lives in Randolph. They do the same thing to many communities. Route 24 and 93 go through there. They're just as high as you are. Thank you.
Thank you. All right. So thank you so much for our public testimony. Make sure that you stay tuned and
I
Sorry.
think you're muted.
I muted I don't know, I muted myself. I talk too much, I guess. I'm just going to shut myself down here. Okay, so thank you so much to those who provided public testimony. Please stay tuned because we're going to have our colleagues ask questions, so please don't go anywhere. I'm going to now turn the floor over to our expected speakers for today. We're going to start off with Glenn Kaplan for his remarks. Then you now have the floor. You have 5 minutes.
Good morning. Thank you, Chair Mejia and members of the Committee on Small Business and Workforce Development for the opportunity to testify at this hearing in the City of Boston. And thank you, Councilor Campbell, for inviting us to participate. Let me just start with a big picture summary, and then I'll go into testimony and it's illegal to rate for insurance on race and on income in Massachusetts. And yet, when we look and see what's happening, there's a big impact that appears to be tied to race and income in terms of what people pay for insurance. This is something that I think we need, and that my office believes we need to fix. Now, it's a policy question, because what this is really about is, should costs be more broadly shared, and how do we go about that? We may be diverted off into a discussion of whether or not the rate is actually accurate and cost-based, and I think there are issues to talk about with that, but I think it's important not to lose account of the bigger issue of, if we're not supposed to be rating based on race and on income, why is it then that there's such a big effect that seems to be tied to race and income? So that having been said, let me move forward. As was mentioned, my name is Glenn Kaplan, and I'm the Chief of the Insurance and Financial Services Division of the Attorney General's Office. And I'm here today on behalf of Attorney General Maura Healey to provide you with some information regarding the effects of the current auto insurance rating policies on communities of color and low-income communities across Massachusetts, and then to make some quick suggestions about what we might do to fix the problem. Now, our office has been studying auto insurance premium disparities for some time. We performed a review of insurance rating practices and the premiums that drivers are paying, and that took a look at where they live and their driving records and their driving histories. We've been advocating to the state legislature. We sent a letter to the Committee on Financial Services, and we've provided that for your review. What we found in these studies and reviews is that the current automobile insurance rating practices have a significant impact on Black, Brown, and low-income communities in Massachusetts. The automobile liability coverage in these communities costs more on average than in wealthier and whiter communities. In the most heavily concentrated communities of color and low-income communities, drivers pay nearly twice as much for significantly less coverage than drivers with comparable driving records in the whitest and most affluent parts of the state. This presents a serious economic hardship for many Massachusetts drivers and families that rely on cars to get to school and work. Let me give you some more additional information that can help better explain the impacts that we're seeing. So we did an analysis and found that drivers who were living in communities with the greatest concentration of non-white residents paid substantially more for liability coverage than the drivers living in communities with the lowest concentration of non-white residents. In the most highly concentrated non-white communities, the average premium for drivers was 90% more per vehicle. That's about $500 roughly. For experienced drivers, that'd be drivers that have 6 years of experience, compared across the same communities, the disparity was 95%. And even with experienced drivers that had excellent driving records, meaning they had no violations and no accidents that were in any way their fault on their record for at least the last 6 years, it was still a difference of 80% per vehicle. Now, these disparities actually understate the real difference in terms of what people are getting for what they pay. Because the drivers in the most highly concentrated non-white communities generally get far less liability coverage on average than the drivers in the whitest communities when they buy insurance. So the overpayments that I've mentioned really mean that those drivers are paying more and getting significantly less coverage at the same time. Moreover, the disparities that we found are so pronounced that an excellent driver in a community of color pays higher average liability premiums than bad drivers in the whitest communities. And this is true even though the drivers in the white communities on average purchase significantly more coverage. Now, when we analyzed communities based on income, we found a similar problem. The drivers living in the lowest income communities paid an average liability premium that was about 70%, about $340 more per vehicle than the drivers living in the highest income areas. Again, for experienced drivers, the disparity was about 75%. And for experienced drivers who had excellent driving records, it was still more than 60% per vehicle. And as was true when we analyzed communities by race, the disparities here understate the actual difference because of this issue about how much coverage people are actually getting when they pay their insurance. And also, being an excellent driver in the low-income communities does not help you to avoid this problem. In the lowest income communities, experienced drivers with excellent driving records still pay higher average liability premiums than their counterparts in affluent communities who have poor driving records. Again, this is true even though in the wealthier community drivers have significantly more insurance. The individuals in the low-income communities who are excellent drivers are still paying more. So looking at Boston specifically, our review pointed out two Boston neighborhoods, Roxbury and Dorchester, that top the list for the state's highest disparities. In Roxbury, experienced drivers on average pay twice the state average for auto insurance, and in Dorchester, those drivers are paying almost twice. They pay about 188% based on our study. Other parts of Boston, though, also have difficulties. East Boston, Hyde Park, Jamaica Plain, Roslindale, they all also have high disparate charges. All of those communities I mentioned are over 140%. I included in my testimony a breakout of the most impacted communities in the Commonwealth, and you can take a look at that just at your leisure to sort of see what some of these numbers look like. So as time has gone forward since auto insurance was deregulated, which happened back in 2008, these disparities have gotten worse. And we believe this is in part attributable to the increased use of rating factors that appear to be close proxies for things that are unlawful to rate on, such as income or home ownership. Even if the current rating system is accurately considering the risks, this gets to that cost-based rating that I was talking about. Important public policy questions remain as to the fairness of the system that results in large racial and economic premium disparities. Now, while the focus of this hearing is on Boston, these are problems really that are statewide and which deserve a statewide response. We need to take action and address this problem. A study, including a close review of recent data, can help us refine our options, but one possibility we should strongly consider is the adoption of a statewide California-style system, which bases insurance premiums primarily on three factors: driving record, miles driven, and years of driving experience. Such a system can be designed to provide a fairer way to rate drivers, and it can also offer low-cost insurance policies for good drivers who are income eligible. I want to thank you for the opportunity to speak on this important issue today.
Thank you so much, Glenn. I am even more upset now than I was when I first started this hearing. This is crazy. And I am so incredibly grateful to Counselor Campbell for calling this hearing. I think that those who follow along and are learning about this, because oftentimes we don't know what we don't know, and I think that we should all be outraged that this is happening in our community. So thank you so much again, Councilor Campbell, for bringing it to the forefront. I also have been notified that President Council Janey has also joined us, and I would love to open up the floor for some welcoming remarks. Councilor Janey, President Councilor Janey, you now have the floor.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Many thanks to the panel and certainly to the maker, Councilor Campbell. This is a very important hearing order, important discussion. As you heard, once again, no matter where we look, if we're looking at healthcare, housing, education, wherever we look, jobs, income, wealth, we see huge disparities. So here we are with auto rates, things that we have known for generations, for decades, And it's unfortunate that we still in 2020 live in a time where this can happen, but I'm so grateful for the conversation that will move this forward. Hearing that Roxbury pays twice the state average is just ridiculous. And it's quite frankly, downright racist. And I think when we are bold enough to name it, then we can address it. Unless we are going to name it, we cannot address it. So again, I'm really grateful. It's great to have the AG's office here. Thank you for being here. And I look forward to what actions we will take in the coming year to address this. So thank you again. And thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Thank you, President Council Janey. I'm also curious, and I'm going to go next to Paul. I would love to open up the floor for your remarks, and then I'd love to spend some time with some questions from my colleagues. Thank you. Paul, you now have the floor.
Good morning. Thank you, Madam Chairman, members of the council. My pleasure to be here. My name is Paul Tatro. I'm the executive director with the Insurance Library of Boston. And I'd like to spend just a couple of minutes explaining what the library is and what it's about, if that's okay. I'm trying to share my screen. How's that look? Yeah, so the Insurance Library, it's right around the corner from the Boston City Hall. It's on 156 State Street, and it's we've been in existence since 1887. It's a unique institution. We're a Chapter 501c3 charitable nonprofit, and we're open to the public. We have a public mission similar to a public library, and we're there as an information resource. So I'm glad to be able to introduce you to the library in this context, because we may be able to be helpful for the subject of the hearing. These are our mission and vision statements. I won't go through them in any detail, but just we serve a broad community. Frankly, anybody with an interest in insurance issues is part of the community that we serve. That includes the public, consumers, scholars, and whatnot, as well as those working in the insurance industry. We're the only independent library in the nation focused on risk management insurance. I think it's worth noting for the council, because we're a gem nationwide for the city. There's no insurance library of Chicago or LA or any place else. We're the only kind of library in existence that serves the public in the way we do. We house the history of the insurance industry, and we conduct research services. We offer professional education and also networking events. I don't want to spend too much time. This is sort of my regular overview, but I know this is a hearing with a specific set of objectives or whatnot. I do want to reference our staff, though. These are the folks that would help with any information inquiries that the council or members of the public might have regarding the subject of the hearing today. We have 2 librarians who have their master's in library science degrees. I've been with the library for decades, so they have a lot to offer as far as understanding insurance issues from a historical perspective and how to find the information that you're looking for. As I mentioned, we offer professional education, everything from licensing to high-level professional designations to individuals in the insurance industry. We hold networking events in the library. When it wasn't a pandemic, we have a large Insurance Professional of the Year award every year. Now we've taken our events virtually, as everybody has. But we're always interested in the exchange of information, learning about new things, learning about important public policy issues like we're discussing today. This is just how we're supported. I usually, when I do a presentation about the library, I encourage people to visit. Again, during a pandemic, I can't do that. But again, we are right down the street. We're right across from the Custom House Tower. So we're kind of a nondescript, quiet building, but we welcome visitors when the time is right. So just specifically to the subject of today's hearing, we just have a wealth of materials about auto insurance rating issues. We have many books and materials about the history of auto insurance. The library's been in existence since before auto insurance existed, before autos were common. So we actually have books that were written in the 30s talking about even just the need to create a sort of a state by state but nationwide insurance liability framework. We have a plethora of legislative and regulatory sources. A lot of Massachusetts-specific reports and analysis. Auto insurance has been a point of interest for public policymakers in Massachusetts for decades. So there's a lot of materials that we have in that regard that might help the council, obtain information quickly and see what other inquiries have been made in the past. And then we have information about other states, what they've done. Mr. Kaplan, mentioned California, that their law there is called Proposition 103, and we have a lot of information about that. But just any other state inquiries, a national things like the Federal Insurance Office in Washington D.C. and the National Association of Insurance Commissioners have all, in recent years conducted studies and analysis of affordability issues that could be beneficial to the committee's inquiry into this subject matter. And just a quick reference to, sort of the basics for Massachusetts law, what rates are governed by, specifically Mass General Laws, Chapter 93A, says that rates may not be excessive or inadequate or unfairly discriminatory. And the regulation 211 CMR 79, again, Mr. Kaplan referred to the prohibition in the state of using race or income as a rating factor, and that's where you'll find that. And again, really just here to provide the offer to be an information resource as the council gets into this issue. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Paul. Really do appreciate the presentation. I am now going to open up for questions from my colleagues. We also know that we will give an opportunity for more public testimony. We have a couple of people in the waiting room who we don't recognize. So if you're interested in providing testimony, please raise your blue hand. The people that we have in the waiting room are Paul Williams, Giselle Guerrero, and Ari Brands. So if you are looking for if you're looking to speak, just raise your blue hand and we'll let you in when that time becomes. Go back to the script. Okay, I think I went off script here. Sorry. So I'm going to now turn it over to my colleagues for questions. So I'm obviously going to start with our lead sponsor, Council Campbell. You now have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Glenn and Paul, for your testimony. And of course, thank you to the folks who provided public testimony as well. And I will tell you that we had residents reach out who either could not attend because of the timing of the hearing or didn't want to participate publicly, but sent emails and other notes to the chair and others with respect to their concerns around these disparities. So I'll have a few questions and then I will keep track of time to be fair to my colleagues. One is around, and before I start, I also want to thank Dominique in my office, who is interning, who put in a lot of research on this and on this particular issue. So I want to thank her. I did not in my opening, so I want to thank her as well. But the first is around data. I think, Glenn, we are getting the stories, right, of people. And as many of my council colleagues reference, I too grew up here. And so we know this to be true and have experienced it personally. But I'm curious what data is available. The study that you reference, what would we want that to get at? Is it data? Is it something more? And what role could a city play, as we wait on the state to do some of this? We obviously don't want to wait too long. So that's just my first question for you.
Yes, I think that, well, let me first just address the data piece. So what we did to come up with the conclusions that we had is that we got very granular data on auto insurance in Massachusetts. We did that by going to the Merit Rating Board, which in turn got it from this entity called CAR, which is, it's auto insurance, so it's an interesting acronym for CAR. It stands for Commonwealth Automobile Reinsurers, but they're the statistical agent for the Commissioner of Insurance. And so we were able to get data from them that broke out for us, at a very granular level, how much people were paying and certain information about those policy risks. And we could then overlay that with both census data and updated census data that breaks down to the community and the smaller block level. And by block, I don't mean like city block, but the smaller unit level. To be able to then run the information, break the communities out by their demographics, what the percentages were of non-white versus white, different aspects of how the community was created, and then in addition to that, the issues of income. And then we were able to go ahead and use our other knowledge by breaking down the premiums. There are different components to insurance. You got to make sure to look at the right things, because some parts of insurance are actually what everybody gets because they're mandatory, others are not. And there's a whole other part if you get the letter that we attach. And I was trying to be mindful of the time that we had, but in some of these issues in my testimony, but in detail. But there's this whole issue, of course, of what people will actually buy and how that actually impacts things as well. And there's this whole interesting thing that even if you're buying sort of the lower levels of insurance, just the basic, in many instances, you're going to pay more than if you were buying, more products or you were buying higher levels of insurance. There's another whole income thing that ties in. But we looked at all this information. We then have a mathematician as well as an outside expert who performed some statistical analysis on this to try to figure out, what factors we're tying in so that we could be sure that the factors of the whiteness of the community and that income were actually relevant and were tracking the premiums. And we believe that when you applied statistical methods to this, and I'll get wonky for just a second, the P factors for this, the R squareds that show how closely the lines fit, all showed that there was a serious connection between the fact that these were, in many instances, the overcharged communities were communities of color, and that they were low-income communities. That other factors, while they may influence the numbers, and in some instances help to further streamline and fit the curve even better, that there was still a high connection to them. They were very correlative, and that troubled us. In terms of a future study, I think what we would want to do is to go ahead and to get more updated data. We found that it's harder now to get data than it was. And so to the extent that we can work with the city of Boston to try to do that, we'd be happy to do it. I think advocacy with policymakers and with the legislature is also a big help. I think the city of Boston has a big voice. And to the extent that you show that you are interested in these issues, I think that would be very helpful. And we're happy to continue to work with you on it. One other thing I would just raise, and I'm sorry, I don't mean to go on, but I think it's important also to always be ready for this issue and to think about this issue of, the rates that we're seeing, they're just based on losses. We're just doing what the losses tell us to do. And the data, to some extent, helps us to analyze that and poke at that. But it also helps us to see what the impact is, because there are many ways to do insurance rates, and there are many ways to sort of share burden. And we should be thinking about that in addition to these issues of how the losses stack up, because there are lots of different ways to get to the same result.
And then my second question is, obviously, Paul, you referenced Chapter 175E, unfairly discriminatory practices. But, the data seems to be clear to us, at least based on what we're seeing in Boston. Maybe this is a question for both of you. So how do we change that, right? How do we get away from using certain metrics, right, in zip code and others, and actually using what California is using right now in the city of Boston as an alternative method to determine these rates, which of course would then lead to a less discriminatory impact that they're having on communities?
And I just wanted to, before you answer, just wanted to be mindful that the timer did go off for 5 minutes, but since you are the lead sponsor, I'm going to allow the indulgence of extra time, but I would love to just make sure that our colleagues who are also waiting have an opportunity. So since you are the lead sponsor and you brought this to the table, I'm going to let you live a little bit longer. So go ahead and answer those questions, guys. Sorry, Glenn, or Paul, if one of you can answer the question, that would be great.
Well, I'll just, since Council referenced my slide citation. Yeah, that's the standard that the Division of Insurance would apply to a rate filing by an insurance company. So to look at whether or not the rate factors are and the losses that are predicted are justified by the historical data. So that, again, just as Mr. Kaplan was referring to, it's based on losses, and that is how it's done. So if it was to be done a different way, that probably would require a change in the law to some extent.
And I will say, I'll let you chime in, but I think that's the push, right? Not only the study and the data to be able to have accurate information around some of what you're talking about that we currently don't have, but then the second is we know the disparate impact it's having, right? So of course want to push for different factors to be used to avoid that. So I'm just curious from your perspective, Lynn, what the hurdles are with respect to using these other factors, and are insurance companies even looking at this impact and saying this is a problem?
Well, I think that there are two things going on. I mean, to Paul's point, the use of unfairly discriminatory in the statute itself has a specific meaning, but there are also other parts to that chapter in that statute that say, for instance, you can't discriminate, all right? And now put aside the unfairly discriminate. You're not supposed to be taking into account sex and marriage status and credit score and age. And the regulation is very emphatic, which has the force of law, that you're not supposed to take into account race, creed, national origin, religion. There's a whole list of them. And the big issue, and I mentioned this in my testimony, is that insurers understand they're not supposed to do that, but there's the second question of whether they're using proxies for those or not. And if they are, and if some of the factors they're using are proxies for those, then we should be addressing that issue, and the commissioner needs to be addressing that issue, and not the kind of thing that doesn't require the big structural changes that other types of changes to the system might. Getting them to use the factors that they should be using as opposed to ones they shouldn't.
But the only way to get at those changes is through state law, or them voluntarily, of course, choosing to use different factors.
Well, I think if by state law, what we're talking about is either a legislative change or, again, I mean, as a quick example, let's say you're not allowed to use home ownership as a factor. And yet insurance companies turn around and say, well, if you have home insurance, we'll give you a break. Well, who has home insurance that doesn't own a home, right? Is it effectively a proxy for that? And if they're using a proxy and it's actually violating it, maybe there's a need to tighten up the regulations at the Commissioner of Insurance. Maybe there's need for just guidance to go out to them to be clear that they can't do it. It's in part digging in and figuring out whether there are other justifications for using these things. But again, that gets to the data and the study. But certainly going to the legislature and making a larger change is another way to go about it, and would get broader results. Thank you, Councilman Mejia. I'll wait to the next round.
That's right, you will, because I was about to let you know about yourself.
I was like, 2 questions. It went by so quickly, but thank you.
Yeah, no, sorry. That was 10 minutes, just so you know. So I'm going to move on to Councillor Flynn. You now have the floor, and then followed by Councillor Arroyo. Let me start this clock over again. Okay. Councillor Flynn, go ahead. You have the floor.
Thank you, Councilor Mejia. I guess my question is, and I may have missed it. I had to get off the call for a few minutes, so I apologize. But I was wondering if someone could explain if you are driving in Boston, say you're going a main road, say you go up Columbia Road to Blue Hill Avenue. Maybe you live in Milton or Dedham or in the suburbs. And you're going up Columbia Road, Blue Hill Avenue, and you have an accident. Does that mean the people living in Mattapan where that accident may have taken place, does that mean their rates might go up even if the people in the accident weren't from that area?
I'm sorry, Councilor, it looks like you froze. I'm not sure.
Oh, okay. Okay, thanks, Glenn. So I wanted to ask if you're driving on a Boston road, a main road, such as Blue Hill Avenue or Columbia Road, you get into an accident and you live in Dedham or you live in Milton and you're cutting for the city to get home, does that mean the rates go up for the people in the impacted neighborhoods such as Mattapan or Dorchester?
Right. Well, I think that taking a step back with that, the big picture issue I think you're asking about is, where does this data generally get tagged? And the answer is it's usually a garaging issue. Like if you get into an accident and let's say that, if you get into an accident, the place that's going to get tagged with that is going to be where you garage your car. Now, the thing about that, though, is if you're in your example, you're driving through that neighborhood, you're getting into an accident with somebody. You may be in an accident with somebody who lives in that neighborhood. And so it can be more complicated. But if we're just talking about, let's say, like a thoroughfare, and it's all basically people who are not living there, all right, then those accidents are going to generally be tagged to the outside. But at the same time, there are impacts on the people who live there. Like I said, you're going to have instances where the people who live there are then faced with this stream of traffic and are going to be subject to significant amounts more risk. And it's not really their fault that they live in a neighborhood that people use as a drive-through to get somewhere else. And so the policy question is, why should they pay for the fact that there's all this additional congestion that's right where they are? Shouldn't they be given some accommodation for the fact that they're helping, for instance, the city of Boston with its economic lifeblood? And under the old system, before deregulation, there was a system of capping and tempering that went on to try to take account for some of these issues. And that's largely all been deconstructed because of the way the system works now.
Thank you, Glenn. If I'm Council Mejia, do I have time for one more question?
Sure, you do.
Say, in using that example again, but say the South Bay Mall, which borders South Boston, Dorchester, and Roxbury, a large shopping plaza. If there's a larceny from a motor vehicle or a break-in and entering of a motor vehicle, do the insurance rates of the people in South Boston, Dorchester, and Roxbury go up just because that location is in their neighborhood?
Councilor, yes, I think that is a problem, and I'll add on to that problem. What about sort of fraud rings? I mean, there are instances where an organized group of people will set up someplace and they will be committing fraud on a high scale that has nothing to do with the people who live in that community, but they just happen to have set it up there. And all of that fraud is going to end up piled onto the statistics for that community. Now, is it fair that the people who happen to live there, all right, and are not involved in this stuff at all right, are going to have their, statistics and their rates impacted by this? Or is this something that we should be more broadly accounting for and share? So yeah, in answer to your question, I mean, the fact is that things can happen because of things that are outside of people's control. And right now, it can have a significant impact.
Thank you, Glenn. I have no further questions. Thank you, Councilor Mejia, and thank you, Councilor Campbell.
Good job. You see, you ended right at 5 minutes. Okay, so we're gonna move on to Councilor Arroyo. You now have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Glenn. A lot of the questions that I have actually been posed by Councilor Campbell. But one of the questions I have, which I think you were starting to get into a little bit at the end there, is about, the role that the AG's office may be able to play in this. And what I mean by that is when we talk about discrimination, whether it be in housing, whether it be in insurance, often the way that they do discrimination is they know what they're not allowed to ask for and what they're not allowed to use, and they use proxies, which it sounds like we have a sense that this is, right? Whenever you end up with these kinds of disparities, specifically in these communities of color, in these lower income communities, something about the way that they've shifted their data allows them to essentially have gotten the same results as if they were grading by race or income, right? Because we're seeing the disparity in those communities the way we are. And the question that I have is, what would an investigation into whether or not these companies are knowingly using those as proxies, are knowingly aware that these are proxies for those kinds of things, what kind of investigation into that would be available for the Attorney General's office? Or would you need sort of a smoking gun? And how would you receive that? If so, if you're not allowed to investigate whether or not these companies internally know that what they're using is creating this result?
Well, I think that there are a couple of things to that. The first one is that one of the things that we are looking for, and the reason that we looked at this in the first place, was to try to understand better what was happening and what was causing the problem. And we are concerned about the proxies, but to some extent also the proxies are things that are subject to these regulations that are put in place by the Commissioner of Insurance, which is why I mentioned that the regulations, being the Commissioner's regulations, one thing we may want to think about is whether they need to be tightened up. Because from our perspective, what we have to look at is whether the existing regulations, whether the existing statute is being violated. And one of the big problems that we run into under the current system is rating by territory is actually still required by statute in Massachusetts. Now, how much of a weight you give to it is a whole other issue, but the statute itself talks about how there needs to be at least 15 territories. And so once you still have territory in there, even though we're talking about how these proxies add to the problem, and I pointed out some of them, because to some extent getting that changed and getting that tightened up may be a way to get at some of it. The reason I mentioned the statutory method also is that once we're rating by territory, what may happen is insurance companies may say, well, wait a minute. Once we're looking at territory instead, look at these losses. That's why I mentioned the losses again. I'm going to say, if the losses are high and we're looking at the territory, right, that's a justification for why we're able to do this. The state says that we're supposed to do it by territory. The losses in the territory are high. And because the losses in the territory are high, we're okay. Now, that doesn't mean that they should be allowed to sort of exacerbate the problem by using all these other factors, which kind of pop it higher. But a big part of the problem is what we looked at when we talked about, look, we did this analysis based on the communities themselves. And those communities, right, they're based on geography, and the geography being taken into account is a big part of the problem. So while we can certainly look at this, and I would say the first thing we would need is more data. Right, and we're happy to help the city council do this and to work with you on this and to look at it more ourselves. But the biggest issue is if we want to make the system fairer, we've got to think about whether we want to spread the risk in different ways, whether we want to limit the factors clearly. Because if we go after certain factors now, the impetus will still be there for creative actuaries to try to come up with other ways, because they're trying to drive to get to the losses. And so, like, if we just knock these down, they may then come up with other factors. But if the system itself limits the factors and says you can only use these 3 or 4 factors, it eliminates all of that from happening. So I hope that then answered the question, but I felt like there were a few questions packed in there, and I apologize for going on so long with it.
No, that was actually very helpful. I appreciated that answer. And I guess I probably have time for just one more question. And so the question on that is, in terms of the status quo, how it's working right now, it hasn't been changed. It sounds, from what I've heard, like a lot of this is going to be at the state level. They're going to need to carry a lot of the water on making these changes. Who profits right now from the status quo? Is there a reason why somebody would look at this process as it exists now, with all of its discriminatory sort of, whether it's on purpose or not, but all of the discriminatory aspects of what's happening now? Who's profiting from that? Is there a reason why, say, a representative in another part of the state would want this system to be in place? In other words, is there a chance that these communities being burdened the way they are is actually subsidizing those communities? Or is it a matter of the impact of what the rates are in, say, Roxbury have no impact on what the rates are in Milton? They're not done that way. Or is it a situation where the rates in Milton are allowed to be where they are because they're subsidized by the height and the amount of rate in, say, Roxbury or Hyde Park or Dorchester?
Wow, that's a good question.
Well, I think all I can say to that is the issue of who profits is not something that I've looked at as specifically as what the impact is. The main thing that I was focused on was, who is suffering from the harm compared to the state average. I think that if you looked at our letter and if you look at the letter we sent to Financial Services that we attached to the testimony, it shows, the premium impact on different communities and shows which communities, are getting really low premiums and how that relates to the non-whiteness of those communities or the income of those communities. But
so I don't want to cut you off because I know I'm short on time. So I do appreciate this answer. But I guess mostly what I'm trying to figure out is, do we know whether or not specifically the fact that these rates are so high in communities of color, does that play a role in the subsidization of lower insurance for these whiter, more affluent communities? Are they tied together? Do they get to pay less because others pay more?
I think it's a complicated question. And the reason is it depends on what you mean by whether they're over or underpaying. I mean, if you have a factor that you're using that is harming the community of color, but is helping a high income white community to bring their rates down, and you didn't use that factor, well, then that's probably going to raise the rates in those communities and lower them in the communities of color. But putting it in terms of who's profiting from it is hard for me to do, again, just because you're asking me now while I'm standing here, and that's just not the way we looked at the data.
Okay, but it would be fair to say that the way that the data is currently put together, certainly whiter, more affluent communities are benefiting from the models and the ways in which they put together what their insurance rate should be.
Well, I think that you could say that their premiums are lower because of the system that we have in place, and you can envision a different system for things that ask different questions in doing the rating, which would raise those rates and lower the rates in the other communities.
Thank you. That's very helpful. Thank you.
Thank you. Those are really great questions, Councilor Arroyo, and I think that the who benefits from this is really key in terms of why we're even having this conversation. If you really think about it, I think that there's something there to definitely unpack. I'd like to give an opportunity. I do have some of my own questions. I'm just curious if we know what we know, and I understand that we need to do a study and show data and facts and figures, but I'm just curious in terms of why, given the huge disparities, how have companies like Geico and State Farm and Progressive, how have all of these insurances gotten away with doing this for so long?
Well, I think that it all sort of has just been an evolution. Because remember, we used to have a regulated insurance system that basically set a specific rate and handled it in a certain way, and there was a hearing, and there was one sort of set of premiums in a system, et cetera. And then during deregulation, it became harder to track what they were doing. If you look, for instance, at some of these insurers' filings now, it's like a black box, and even for our office, it's very hard to sort of tease out how they're using and treating the rating factors. And they set up a bunch of different companies for purposes of underwriting so that it's very difficult to track what's happening. And it wasn't until, we went ahead and were able to get this data, which was hard to get, to be able to run this, that we were able to see the impacts here. So I think part of it is just, it used to be many years ago that auto insurance was very spotlighted. There was one hearing every year. There was a ton of coverage in the Boston Globe, and everybody was focused on these rates. And now people don't even necessarily know when the rates are changing until they get their bill, because everything is atomized out. There's no central time when it's all happening all at once. And I think the companies are able to sort of do a lot of the changes they're making without as much public disclosure, without as much of a spotlight on.
Right. And so for those who are doing business in Boston, Councilor Campbell, this question is probably more so for you, because I know this is something that you brought here to the floor. But I'm just curious, on a municipal level, when you think about this conversation, what can we do as a council to even maybe perhaps put a moratorium, put a freeze, like until the studies could, I know that sounds crazy, but is there a way for us to even consider doing a price lift freeze until we figure some things out so that we can at least slow down the harm that we're causing so many of our constituents. I'm just curious if that's even legal. You're a lawyer, you probably will let me know whether or not that is even worth doing, but I'm just curious, what can we do right now to?
Yeah, so I don't know that we can do that. I mean, I think the purpose of this hearing, and I was really happy that that Glenn and AG's office could come because they've been in the weeds on this, was one, to really get at the data piece. And I think that part is critically important, right? To be able to even take the stories we're hearing to say these people and our residents aren't making this up, that these disparities are real. You need those numbers and that information, and how hard it is to get. And so I think that us as a city pushing for more data and information and not waiting on the state is something we should be pursuing, because the state can take a long time. Or, the DOI at the state, we talk to them, it's hard to get information from them. It's just difficult and challenging. So I think that's one piece. I think the second piece is exploring what else we can do, right? So that was going to be my next line of questions, particularly for Glenn. Obviously, California is doing something different. We can wait on the state, but what is it the city of Boston could be doing with respect to insurance companies? What levers and what more levers do we have as a municipality to pull in order to create greater movement? Outside, of course, advocating and pushing through this hearing and calling people at the State House and reaching out to the Division of Insurance, what other levers could we pull at the city level to be able to have an impact on this issue that people can feel, right? You just talked about how everything is so hidden. Is there something we can do to promote more transparency so people know about these rates? So we require some kind of release of information so that people don't have to wait till they get their bill, or people at least can see the differences. I mean, there are folks who don't even know they're paying more and getting less coverage. Most of the folks who reached out to us were folks who moved literally from Mattapan to Dorchester, or from JP to Mattapan, or JP to Roxbury, and said, wait a minute, why did my insurance just go up for no reason? So what else could we do legally? It's something I'm still exploring, but I definitely wanted to hear your perspective and thoughts as well.
And before you answer, Glenn, I just wanted to recognize that we also have been joined by my colleague, Councilor Breeden, who has joined us. And just curious if Councilor Breeden, you wanted to say hello and any opening quick remarks while you're here. And then Glenn, I'll give you some extra time to answer that question, because we're gonna hold you accountable to some really good ideas that we can pursue, okay? So think about that while Councilor Breeden says hello and have an opening remark.
I think this is a really important, I'm sorry I'm late, I had a conflict this morning. I think it's a really important conversation to have. I know there's all sorts of ways that people try and get around this issue about their insurance rates in the city being higher than a neighboring suburb. So it's definitely something I really appreciate the attention to, and I hope that we can change it and improve the situation. So thank you so much for your leadership on this, and I'll just continue to listen in. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Breeden. Okay, Glenn, now you have an opportunity to save us. Give us something to work with.
Well, I wish I had more to tell you than what I mentioned before, which I think that the advocacy piece is a big piece. I know that, for instance, when credit scoring was an issue, this is years back, and obviously credit scoring can have a large impact on communities of color, and that was going to be put into the auto insurance system. And our office had opposed it, but it was after the city of Boston, weighed in and also raised issues about it, that then there was a change, and it ended up being put into the statute that they can't use credit scoring. So I would just urge you to think about the impact that the city can have. Separate from that, though, Councilor Campbell and our office have had discussions right previously on this, and I'm happy for us to have more. We'd like to work with you and brainstorm and try to come up with ideas and ways that you can use the vantage that the city has and the tools that the city has to try to help with this problem. I think that there may be things that can be done, but I do want to underscore that a legislative solution, if you want to get at the big picture issue, is probably a way to do this, because look, the insurers are just going to say that they're just following the losses, and that the reason things work out this way is they're looking at those numbers. And again, getting back to my initial comment, a lot of this instead has to be about, we got to think about what's fair, and is there a way to do this to, make it a fairer system?
Councilor Campbell?
No, I think, we're definitely going to continue the conversation and bring back different ideas. We were trying to at least get this conversation started before the end of the year because of the concerns we were hearing, of course, from residents. But I think it's a step in the right direction. And particularly, I'm grateful to my council colleagues as well, because this is going to take all of us to do something here. But there are some concrete ideas on the table that have to be explored, and including legally, if it's possible. And so putting some thoughts together, and we'll definitely continue this conversation working in partnership with you guys.
Thank you. I'm going to see if it's okay if the two folks who I see, we have some folks who are in our waiting room. Not sure if there's Paul Williams. If you are interested in any public testimony, please raise your blue hand. Ari. Okay, but now I'm inviting them and they're all leaving. Okay, fine. You don't have to say anything. It's all good. But I would like to create an opportunity for our two public testimony that spoke earlier today to see now that what you heard and any additional remarks that you'd like to make, or things for us to consider and think about as we continue to move this conversation forward. And then I'd like to give my colleagues an opportunity. Ari, I'm sorry. I see Ari. Are you interested in speaking, Ari?
Yes, please.
Oh, okay. So before we move on to those who have already spoken, let me go to Ari. Ari, please introduce yourself. You now have the floor in 2 minutes.
All right. Can you see me? Great. Thank you so much. So good morning. My name is Ariel Brands, and I am a resident of Roxbury. I also could have started this testimony saying that I'm a resident of Boston, because last I checked, Roxbury is a neighborhood in Boston. A few months ago, I bought my first car. As I compared prices for auto insurance, I filled out AAA's online insurance quote. I filled out Boston and was quoted $1,688. A rep from AAA reached out to me to follow up with a more detailed quote totaling $3,353. That's almost double. When I asked why, the rep said, the price is higher than what you were quoted online, as your zip code reflects Roxbury rather than Boston. Roxbury has a higher rate. I countered that Roxbury is a neighborhood in Boston. He responded, the neighborhoods are categorized into different risk tiers based on whatever algorithms a particular insurance carrier uses. So let's be clear. Roxbury is 11% white, and Boston overall is 45% white. This reeks of racism. I love living in Roxbury, and I love living in Boston. And while I love our unique neighborhood pride, it reeks of racism that residents of different neighborhoods are quoted different prices on auto insurance. It especially incenses me that my Black and brown neighbors in Roxbury are charged more than the whiter residents of other neighborhoods. Thank you for your time.
Thank you so much, Ari. That is truth right there. So I would like to see if my colleagues, our two public testimony speakers earlier, Leon and Andrew, if there's anything else that you'd like to bring to the conversation before we close. And Andrew, I know it's going to be a quick question or a comment, and then I'm going to move on to Leon, and then I'm going to ask my colleagues. So this is just a courtesy.
Thank you. Mr. Kaplan said data is getting more difficult to obtain. And I just wanted to point a contrast to this single payer system at British Columbia. It says, because of COVID, with people using their cars so much less, insurance claims were 329.5 million less than were expected for the first quarter or second quarter. At the same time, premium revenue was reduced by $136 million. You can go on their website and find maps that you can zoom in on each accident, each intersection through the entire province, and see how many accidents occurred in each exit, in each intersection, and so on. It's just truly amazing. and it's a system that reflects the values that most people aspire to. Thank you.
Thank you. And Councilor Breeden, I know you had some opening remarks. I'm just curious if you have any specific questions that you'd like to bring to the floor.
I think just following on from the previous speaker, I think if we have a data-based system that's founded decision-making that's based on data rather than just drilling down into the data and identifying, intersections that are problematic, might be a way to inform policy better. I'm just not sure. I know that we have asked for a data analyst for traffic accidents in Boston, but I don't know whether and they were appointed this year, so I'm not sure if that is producing any better information than we had before.
So I'm not sure who.
So that's more of a statement rather than, to bring in the data analyst information that we might have to inform this discussion as well, so that it's based on real data from incidents of accidents rather than just a perceived prejudice against communities of color in our city.
Thank you. Thank you, Councilor Breeden. So, again, Andrew, let me find out. You live in Arlington. Now, hold on. Let me go to Leon first.
Okay.
So you know, okay? Leon, really quick, if you just have any other questions, follow-up, I'd like to then move on to our lead sponsor and my colleagues for final remarks.
Sure. I just want to thank Councilor Campbell for doing this because it's so important. And again, I'm wondering if maybe for our next conversation, we can have some state officials with us just to give us a better idea of what can be done as a whole, just working together, because I know it's hard for the city council. It sounds like listening to Glenn, hands are a bit tied. So maybe if we can include some state elected officials here, local elected officials, just to see what we can do moving forward, and get something done for 2021.
Thank you.
I'll just add, Councilor Mejia, that we did reach out to Rep. Frank Moran, has been doing incredible work on this in this space for a long time and filed legislation. They were unavailable because of just this craziness at the State House, but we will keep them engaged, and for the next conversation, plan around some of these other folks' schedules to make it happen for sure. So thank you, Leon, and thank you, Andrew.
Thank you. So I have violated all of the norms of hearings because I've.
Thank you.
So Andrew, this is your last question or comment, and that's it. Then I'm going to go to my colleagues and I'm going to put you on mute. Go.
Thank you so much for indulging me. My friend in Randolph said that his town is 65% ethnic, but he pointed out. And they have super high rates because of the two highways. He pointed out Avon is mostly white, and they have the same issue. So it's kind of a case where what's mathematically rational overrules what we really want. That's all. Thank you so much for indulging me.
Thank you, Andrew. So I'm going to go for Councilor Campbell. Do you think we're good to close out with? Do you have any other questions? Any other? So we'd love to close out if you don't mind.
No, that sounds great. And I want to be mindful of people's time. I know it's a busy time. And I appreciate Glenn and Paul taking time out of their busy schedules to be here. And Paul, I appreciate you sharing about the institution that's right here in the city of Boston that most folks don't even know about, to learn around the history of this industry, which I think is critically important. And clearly we still have a lot more work to do. Although, as many folks have testified, it's illegal to use race and income and certain factors. The impact that we're seeing is very much falling along those lines. And the fact that communities of color are paying more and receiving far less coverage is just astounding and ridiculous all at the same time. And so we have to do something to change it. We definitely want, of course, to work in partnership with our state colleagues and Rep. Moran and others who have Frank Moran, taken the lead on these issues. But then, of course, thinking about what we can do as a city at the same time. And so I have a lot of notes and ideas. looking into whether or not legally we can do certain things. But I think we can push for a study. I think we can push for more data collection, making it easier, and maybe some disclosures and other things that are useful, but then also, of course, some other pieces as well, and particularly looking at the work in California around this very issue to change the factors that folks use. So thank you to all my council colleagues. And of course, thank you to the panelists and those who testified. And Ari, thank you as well for coming and testifying. Stay safe and healthy and enjoy the holiday season, everyone. Thank you, Councilor Dia.
Thank you. Thank you. Don't go nowhere because I have my other colleagues. I'm the one who gravels us out here.
I'm here.
Blow your roll. I'm going to go next to Councilor. I think Councilor Flynn has left, so I'm going to go next to Councilor Arroyo for closing remarks, if you are still with us. He might have left. So I'm going to go to Councilor Breeden.
Thank you. I think this is a really important conversation. I'm sorry I missed most of the conversation this morning, but I am very interested in following up and continuing to be engaged in this conversation going forward. And hopefully we will make some substantial changes and make this a more just and equitable business system. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I would like to just make sure that we don't have any other public testimony. So I just want to say thank you to the members of the public and to the panelists for their testimony. I really do appreciate the thoughtfulness of our interaction here today. And I do believe, as I'm looking forward to working alongside my sister in service, Councilor Campbell, because I see this as an issue that is impacting a lot of people across the city. And so looking forward to continuing the dialogue and more importantly, to moving us beyond the dialogue so that we can make some things happen. So incredibly grateful to you all. I'm going to gavel us out because I don't have a formal one. This hearing is now adjourned. Thank you,
everyone.
Thank you. Bye, everybody. Okay, bye.